You're listening to The Streaming Wars, the podcast that discusses all of the latest happenings regarding your favorite streaming services. Find out which service is winning the war this time around.
Hello everyone, welcome to the latest episode of The Streaming Wars. I am Dustin, with me is Tony, and we are here to discuss all the content news from January 17th through the 23rd. We have a bunch of different things to cover, some more stuff falling out of TCA from the back half of last week. We also have the content news that was revealed out of the Peacock Investor Conference that was last week as well, and then just the normal group of stuff that trickles in here and there throughout for a lot of the other services. So let's dive straight into Netflix. First up, Bill Prady, who is the co-creator of The Big Bang Theory, has inked a first deal look with Netflix. Netflix has obtained the international streaming rights to the Studio Ghibli library. Netflix has picked up Bradley Cooper's Leonard Bernstein biopic, and Netflix has announced a Witcher anime film. So the first thing we're going to talk about out of this group of news is the Studio Ghibli library and Netflix. We had a listener comment that came in last week, or I guess earlier this week, and the listener comment was like they wanted to hear our thoughts about this. And I know, Tony, you had said in the past that you're not super familiar with what it is or why it's so popular. So what is it that would help explain what it is?
So I guess the main thing is what type of films they produce and why do they have such a following? Like, is it from a cultural perspective? Is it like a narrative perspective? You know, I'm just trying to figure out why this is just such a big thing in general.
I'm not going to claim that I'm an expert by any means. I'm not. I can honestly say that I was introduced to Studio Ghibli through my wife, who has watched all of the films and has her favorites, but has enjoyed all of them. She introduced my daughter to them. My daughter loves them. The thing is, the best way to describe it is that it's basically the Japanese Disney. And honestly, that's the best way to describe it. There's a huge group of movies that have been made over the course of multiple decades. And it's about 22 films, I think, total in their library. But out of the 22 films, Hayao Miyazaki is an animator who is the equivalent to Walt Disney, but in Japan. He's very well known and creates these amazing characters, but the characters are very specifically focused on like one-off stories. They never got to the point where they over merchandise the characters or over exploited the characters or anything like that, to the sense of they're standalone stories. They create very unique, creative, and very well done stories. Has very emotional moments in a lot of the stories that draw connections to adults and children, very much like some of the older Disney films and even some of the newer Disney films as well, how they have the ability to connect with a larger audience. So that's part of the reason why they're so popular. The other reason they're very popular is the characters that are created are not like the characters you would see typically in like a Disney film, which is mostly like animals that talk. Instead, in the Studio Ghibli films, there's a lot of unique creatures and characters that are created from some of the most random things. So one of the most famous characters is a Totoro, and basically it looks like if you took a bear and you took a hamster and you kind of melded the two, where it's as big as a bear, but it's like very round and fat and just cute looking. And the thing is, the big thing in Japan is kawaii. If you're not familiar with that, it's basically like things that are very cute and cuddly. The culture embraces the cuteness of these characters, and that's part of the reason why the popularity has resonated for as long as it has. But when it gets to the international market, like over here in the States, it is something that has connected to fans here in the States, because unlike other anime films, now anime, at least my interpretation, is Japanese animation. That's how most people interpret it. Most anime is made for adults. It's not necessarily made for kids. These films are made for children, and they appeal to adults as well, just like Disney movies can as well. Lots of anime that you typically see is geared more towards an older audience. This is not that. This is geared towards a younger audience as well. So I think that's part of the reason. But the other reason is, so back in 2005 or 2006, after Pixar was acquired by Disney. The head of Pixar, John Lasseter, had a relationship with Hayao Miyazaki in Japan and actually got a deal together for Disney to distribute the Studio Ghibli films here in the States because they were not available in the States, at least not, legally. And they were never streaming. They were never, obviously streaming wasn't a thing back then, but they weren't streaming. They weren't even available on disc. So Disney actually partnered with them to distribute these films, and it was like an extension of Disney without being Disney. And that was part of the thing. And then they eventually they got to Blu-ray. Now that distribution deal is over with Disney, but now it's interesting because we heard back in October, HBO Max picked up the digital streaming rights for North America for the Studio Ghibli films, specifically US and Canada. And that was big news at the time because 2 weeks prior, Studio Ghibli had the director at Studio Ghibli had said, we believe our product deserves to be seen on the big screen, not on the small screen, and that's why we are not anxious to stream these movies. And now here we are less than 6 months later, and now practically everywhere worldwide they'll be available on some sort of streaming service, because within the United States they'll be available in HBO Max. Outside of the US and certain other regions, they'll be available on Netflix. So I think the biggest thing is it shows that, one, these group of films, even though it's only 20-something films, resonates with a wide audience enough for a streaming service to pick it up. Specifically here in the States, they made a big deal about it when they announced that. But then also it's a big deal outside of the United States because Netflix decided they wanted the rights internationally. So HBO Max, clearly they're not ready to roll out internationally, and Studio Ghibli clearly wanted license the rights internationally as well. So it's good for Studio Ghibli because they get a lot of licensing fees from a lot of, from these deals. But it's good for fans because a lot of these films will then be available worldwide for people to view.
Gotcha. That makes a little bit more sense now. One, I didn't even know what they were. I didn't know if it was anime or not. I mean, I know that there's more of a strict definition among, the purists, but for me, it was like, well, it sort of looks like anime, but maybe not really. And then it was just like, well, what is the appeal? What sets this quote unquote anime apart from the other anime that I've seen on, Netflix or, other places? Because Netflix has embraced a lot of anime as of recently. So for me, in that perspective, it was like, okay, they're just expanding their catalog in that subcategory. But now knowing what Studio Ghibli is, why it's important, and why your wife likes it and your daughter, it's nice to know, to see a different opinion on the matter, and an opinion that appreciates how it scales well for kids and adults, like some of the Disney movies. Not all of them. Some of them do better at other things, but it's really good when you can get properties that can reach many people, all people of different generations and cultures and stuff like that. So I think he did a good job explaining what Studio Ghibli is and why they are important, while this is such a big deal. So a follow-up question I have is, it's great for Studio Ghibli, but for these studios, right, maybe not these companies like Disney or CBS or NBC, and you don't want to pony up your own network. I think Studio Ghibli is a great example of, we'll crank out content, but we'll have, very lucrative deals with a bunch of other people. And the thing is, although the US rights probably, made a good, penny, Netflix is such a huge distributor, across, the globe, a lot bigger player than all these others in the streaming market right now. And the fact that they get to reach the audience, kind of closest to home. I think the US deal sounds really good and great, but I think this Netflix deal is really where Studio Ghibli is going to get a lot of that, streaming, licensing revenue from. And I think this is a good precedent for, those smaller studios out there. It's just like, hey, we want to create content and let's kind of have a bidding war to see who does best. And maybe one company does outbid the other one, but you can judge, okay, who is best for what market of people. Obviously, some of these US companies are, going to be great at getting US viewers. I don't even know who a close second is in terms of global, other than, Netflix. And so I think this is a good precedent for future studios.
It's definitely overall a good thing for some of these smaller studios. The thing is, there's plenty of studios that don't have an extensive library. Sony is a good example of somebody who doesn't have a service. is okay with licensing their stuff elsewhere and making partnerships and deals. But at the same time, they clearly have a very, very extensive back catalog of content because they've been making television, making movies for a very, very long time. I mean, just the Columbia Pictures, which is Sony owns, has been making pictures almost as long as some of the other major studios like Paramount and Universal. So the thing is, they're not a good example, but when you look at some of the other studios out there that don't have as extensive as a catalog, or they focus on something very specific, there's a lot of opportunities for them to have their content reach a much wider market with just these international deals that are coming into play with Netflix. And it's nice to see that Netflix is taking content from a country, licensing it so that the entire world can see it. We've seen this a lot of different times. Amazon's talking about how they're going to be doing more international deals and things like that. Overall, it's a good thing all around to see this happening because it also makes the world a little bit closer knit when you can see content and appreciate content from other areas of the world, because that's not something we see. Obviously, the internet connects everybody, but really absorbing content and understanding cultures based off of the media that's presented is another way to really bring the world closer and make everybody understand people a little bit better. So it's good. Next up, Prime Video. Amazon passes on Good People. This was a Me Too themed college comedy that was headed up by Whitney Cummings and Lee Daniels. That's not going to be moving forward. The other bit of news was that Amazon is currently developing an Alex Cross series. The last time if you're unfamiliar with Alex Cross, it is a James Patterson spy novel series. The last time Alex Cross was in any sort of media was played by Tyler Perry, but they're developing a series that'll be, again, it's another spy thriller series like we've seen with Jack Ryan. And then last week we talked about Jack Reacher. So they clearly can see that there is success with that type of content, especially with the success that we've seen with Jack Ryan. So they're clearly looking and seeing what else can we adapt and what else can we turn into our next hit to fill in some of those larger gaps with the amount of content that they have.
What's interesting about this Alex Cross deal is it seems like he's still writing books. So although we don't know necessarily the legalese of the document, they could essentially just assign a creator and have exclusive rights to his upcoming work as well. And so it's not it's not, I guess what I mean is you're not just buying this author's books then to produce into a movie. You essentially are getting the author of the story to be with you that whole entire process, and to, as long as he's going to keep writing books, you can keep adapting them. So to me, that is the most interesting, part of this news. Yes, once again, it seems like, Amazon's done their math and their statistics and seeing that, okay, like people really like their spy shows and there's only so many weeks in the year to release stuff. So you need to fill the gaps, and that's great. But I think any other day we could talk about that. But, once again, securing authors, securing these content creators of different medium to bring them in-house to create these projects. To me, that's what I see is newsworthy.
All right. Apple TV Plus, The Banker, has gotten a new release date in March. If you remember, The Banker was meant to release back in December during a film festival. It ended up getting held back. Now it's going to be releasing in March. Julia Louis-Dreyfus has signed an overall deal with Apple to produce and star in content. Dear is a new docuseries that will profile a variety of different people, including Oprah Winfrey, Spike Lee, Gloria Steinem, Lin-Manuel Miranda, a variety of different people.
I have a question about the Banker. So is that going to be released in theater or just Apple TV Plus? My expectation is just going to be on the service, but sometimes when you hear the word release, it could mean more than one way, especially with Samuel L. Jackson and Anthony Mackie as the leads.
So it will be released in theaters first, and then it will end up on Apple TV Plus, but it's basically, it's being released theatrically on March 6th. It will land on Apple TV Plus 2 weeks later on March 20th. So the idea is that it's going to have a short window similar to some of the Netflix films that release ahead of time. So that way, if it can qualify for awards down the line because it did release theatrically.
If they didn't, let's just say, put this theatrically, I'd be a little bit surprised and a little bit dumbfounded because, those two actors really draw people. You really draw crowds. So thanks for clearing up. That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. All right, Disney Plus. Justin Long will be hosting a new reality series called Shop Class. This is coming in February, so it's right around the corner. Jumping over to HBO HBO Max, there's a cooking competition series called Fantasy Food Fight that has been ordered at HBO Max, as well as a new animated comedy series called The Prince, which is a British royal satire animated comedy series. So that is coming in the future to HBO Max as well, probably further out due to the fact that it's animated. Jumping over to some other services. So the big news is going to be Peacock, which we'll get to in a minute, but there was some other things. So obviously there's some Quibi stuff. There's a couple of new shows, Fierce Queens from Reese Witherspoon. There's another one called Immoral Compass with Bill Burr. Just One Drink starring Laura Dern. And then there's an anthology comedy series called Florida Man. All of those are series that will be coming to Quibi in the near future. Then we have jumping over to Hulu, which they had their TCA presentation after our last episode, so they have a number of different things. First up, Hulu has ordered a new comedy series featuring Steve Martin, Martin Short. There is a number of new shows and new seasons of shows that have gotten premiere dates over the next 3 or 4 months. Then there was 3 new children's series that have been ordered at Hulu, including a Madagascar series, Trollstopia, and The Mighty Ones. They're all coming from DreamWorks, specifically for Hulu. So that is all of the Hulu. Outside of that, let's get into the Peacock news because there's a bunch here. So if you haven't listened to our last episode, specifically the episode just a couple days ago, where we laid out everything having to do with Peacock, I specifically said we were going to get to the Peacock content news on this episode because there was a bunch of stuff that was announced that we didn't know about before, and I didn't want to spend too much time talking about it because there's a lot. So the first things first, the first thing that was announced in the investor conference was that NBC has signed a non-exclusive deal with Dick Wolf to have the wide variety of Law and Order shows and all of the entire Chicago franchise. Reading through the details, there wasn't a whole lot of details released from NBCUniversal as far as what the deal means, but the fact that it's non-exclusive implies that it's possible that some of the other... Okay, so to put in perspective, the entire Dick Wolf library, outside of the few shows that he has over at CBS with FBI and FBI Most Wanted, adds up to over 1,500 episodes. And instead of trying to shop an entire library of content like that to a specific service, they've decided that they're going to pay up some money themselves and offer it elsewhere as well to kind of split the cost so that it's not exclusive to one service. So it has the ability to make money at multiple services. In the deal, or in the article itself that we have in the show notes, it specifically details that it's possible that you could see a rotating group of episodes end up on a service and then it rotate out and come back and forth because there's so much content and there's so many different Law and Orders, series, and things like that. It might be too much to have one service absorb all of it at once. So that was an interesting thing because that was something that I thought was very likely to happen as far as the Dick Wolf stuff ending up on Peacock, but it could potentially end up somewhere else down the line as well. So that was that. Kevin Hart set a new deal with Peacock for his Laugh Out Loud network, where he's going to be producing some content for Peacock. Tina Fey is producing a new series for Peacock called Girls 5 Ever, and it's a girl group series that focuses on a girl band from the 90s or early 2000s that decides maybe they're trying to explore whether or not they should get back together for like a reunion tour or something like that. So that's coming for Peacock as well. So that was the big things. There's a bunch of other stuff related to content on Peacock, but those were the big items that were new that were announced. There were a couple of trailers shown during the investor conference, but not released publicly. For some of the upcoming shows, there was a number of shows that were confirmed that will in fact be coming to Peacock. We have the Saved by the Bell sequel, revival, or however they're phrasing it. There's the Punky Brewster. There's Rutherford Falls, which is a new show coming starring Ed Helms. There's AP Bio, which was on NBC, is moving over to Peacock exclusively. So there's a bunch of different content, some existing, some shifting, some moving over. And then they obviously have a lot of other content, back content, that will also be available on the service as well. So that is all the news when it comes to all the other services.
Yeah, Peacock getting the entire Dick Wolf library, I think that's, okay, not exclusive, right? But getting access to all that content, I think it's great. Seeing Tina Fey once again. She's just had such a deep partnership with, NBC Universal, that it totally makes sense. I like your point about how, we talk about the idea of exclusive content and people signing these big deals like J.J. Abrams or Greg Berlanti or Shonda Rhimes, right? And, these great deals that are like exclusive for, streaming on, their platforms, which is great. But this Dick Wolf deal kind of, breaks that trend. And I think it allows creators to pick and choose, right? If you have such a volume, you can be like, okay, and then also studios as well. And it gives them an out because it's like, well, I want this content, but, I want people to watch it. Like HBO Max, the whole thing is like, I argued for HBO Max to just absorb Cinemax content and just put it on there. I remember that you were telling me, it was like, well, they do this like human curation thing and, maybe their content isn't up to par for the HBO Max service. And I think in a situation like with all of, Dick Wolf's content, so much stuff and so much good stuff too. It's you might be oversaturating the market, and especially a lot of his shows are in this whole like law and order space. And, you don't want to oversaturate your own market. You don't want to your own service. You might not just be able to even handle it at all. Or, you for Dick Wolf, like you have such a huge pie that you can still divvy it up to these different streaming platforms, and you could do quite well for yourself just because of how huge it is, and you're going to do yourself well. So I like the idea of somehow like rotating it. It reminds me a lot of like the old school idea of like, Disney's Vault, where, this video will only come out and release, at certain points, and kind of gives it that exclusivity point of view. And so I think that's interesting. It's one of those situations. We're moving in this trend of exclusivity. We're moving in this trend of like a creator dumps all their stuff in one place. And yet for a guy who just is a legend and has so much stuff, he's really bucking that trend. And I like events like that where people buck the trends, because it's like, well, I'm curious what's going to happen down the road where they broke the norm, and then what's going to be expected. Like, are these creators who do have exclusive contracts, will they think back and be like, well, was that necessarily the best idea to do that? Or that's what I'm interested in. And I like to know about for the future. That to me is what sticks with me about the Dick Wolf deal. For NBC, I was a little bit worried about who they would be as a service. Yes, it still seems like they're just all about backlog content right now. And they have a lot of good backlog content. The Office, Parks and Rec, Dick Wolf stuff. They have a lot of good backlog, but I was worried it's just going to be backlog. It's like, well, what's the point? Like, I could just go somewhere else and watch this. I just go get the box set from, Walmart and watch the stuff. But it is nice to know that they are kind of pulling a CBS All Access approach and are delivering original content pieces. I thought for NBC Universal, I really thought that this service was going to be kind of a back burner project. Like, let's make some money off of subscribers, but let's just keep doing our thing over here. But it's nice to see that that's not what Comcast has planned. No, does it seem like it's going to be HBO Max or, Disney Plus or like Netflix? No, but it seems like a great CBS All Access player. It seems very complementary to what NBC Universal is doing and what Comcast is doing as a whole, which, as a business, not everyone should be Netflix. You should be complementary to what your business. So overall, toward the very beginning of the episodes, we could probably play the soundbite where I was making fun of Peacock and I had no clue what it was. And it was like, well, what the hell is going on? But now just knowing everything and seeing how, NBC's taken this, essentially pet project and turned it to a deliverable in a few months, I've just been very impressed by how everything's gone.
It comes down to, it is smart what they're doing, and they're doing it in a way that is going to make sense and make them money, but also allow content to be seen without having to charge because of that free option that they will have, even if the content is limited.
It seems like, my last point is just going to be, in comparison to some of these other studios, right? Netflix, they've been in business for a while, HBO Max, Disney Plus, Hulu. It seems like CBS All Access and NBC, there's this concern, some circles, that some of these streaming services are taking a whole lot of debt to create original content. But it seems how CBS All Access and NBC and Peacock are set up, where they're supposed to be complementary. They're not business. They're not the whole entire business. They are complementary to the whole business. It seems like these services are going to take a different route, where they're not going to be in this mad dash for original content, which is equivocal to a mad dash of big debt. And so I think that's important to keep our eye on, as well as is how their business models are going to be different, and how is that going to help them and dictate their growth for the future. Like, just because you're gaining subscribers or something like that doesn't necessarily mean that you're, a financially stable part of the company. And so just keeping that in my head for the future, and see how NBC officials, drive that brand in their next steps.
All right, so moving over to the trailers, we've got Lost Girls on Netflix coming March 13th. Diary of a Future President on Disney Plus, already released on January 17th. Hillary on Hulu comes on March 6th. Normal People on Hulu comes sometime in 2020. Little Fires Everywhere on Hulu, March 18th. High Fidelity on Hulu, February 14th. The Great on Hulu, May 15th. Visible out on television on Apple TV Plus, coming February 14th. Spencer Confidential on Netflix, March 6th. Horse Girl on Netflix, February 7th. Gentified on Netflix, February 21st. Pokemon Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution on Netflix, February 27th. Star Wars The Clone Wars Season 7 on Disney Plus, February 21st. The Pharmacist on Netflix, February 5th. Tom Papa, You're Doing Great on Netflix, February 4th. Miss Americana on Netflix, January 31st. To All the Boys, P.S. I Love You on Netflix, February 12th. And The Last Thing He Wanted on Netflix, February 21st. Now, I know there was a specific trailer here you wanted to mention.
Yeah, it is Star Wars. So yes, the nerd in me is so happy just seeing, this another release of the series. For Star Wars fans, I think it's great. There's a lot of extra lore that's in here. In the series as a whole, it's very complimentary to Star Wars in general. Dave Filoni, who has been one of the main people on The Mandalorian, you get to see him just have an understanding of the Star Wars universe that, almost rivals to George Lucas to some extent. He created it. And to finish off the story arcs of some of, very beloved characters that he has created, and who, we've followed their journey from the Clone Wars 1 through 6, and then, Star Wars Rebels. And so it's interesting to see how this show started as, just another kids cartoon on Cartoon Network, and then developed such a big following, and seeing kind of into the era and a pincushion to the area of Star Wars between episodes 2 and 3 about the Old Republic, and how a republic can fall in the rise of the Empire. And it's one of those few times where, because this show is going to get canceled after season 5. After season 5, Netflix picked it up to finish out season 6 because some of it was already done, and now Disney Plus is, because of fans, has created one more season for it. And so it kind of like, Young Justice as well, another show that started on Cartoon Network. It's where it gained a loyal following for making a great show that's visually beautiful, great lightsaber battles, great space stuff, with compelling characters, and with a great story and a great lore. Yeah, at times it's, a little bit of a cartoon, yeah, but as a whole, it has so many good Star Wars stories, and I think it's great.
And some of the trailers that I saw that I just want to call out on, Hillary on Hulu. It's a documentary focused on Hillary Clinton. I'm not specifically a Hillary supporter, but it did look like it could be a very unique story, showing her from a different lens that we might not have ever seen, given her involvement so much in the public eye. So there's that. Spencer Confidential, which is a movie coming out from Netflix starring Mark Wahlberg. This is just yet another film that Netflix is getting in the same line as Six Underground with Ryan Reynolds from Michael Bay. This one is with Mark Wahlberg and Peter Berg. Then there's also another movie coming out, which is the last trailer, The Last Thing He Wanted, which actually stars Ben Affleck and Anne Hathaway. So they're not holding the punches when it comes to looking for these high-profile films starring high-profile actors. They're definitely getting these projects and getting them for it. And I would expect, honestly, over the next year to see at least one of these major films per month that are going to do very well for the service. Six Underground, which came out in December, was one of the projects that they actually mentioned in their quarterly earnings, did extremely well as far as the amount of people that viewed it. So I would expect a lot more projects like that. Or Triple Frontier, which came out last I think it was June. That was another one that they called out last year and said that did really, really well for the service. So while it's not a TV series, they are these films. Bright is another film that did very well for the service that might not have been appreciated by the critics, but audiences really turned out to see it. So these films, you're going to start to see a lot more films, I think, and it's just going to start growing. So be on the lookout for that. Finally, There's a bunch of new releases over the next week that are releasing. I know, Tony, you wanted to speak about one specific show that actually releases today as we're recording this.
Yeah, so today, Thursday, the 23rd of January, the new show on CBS All Access, Star Trek Picard is out, and I haven't watched it yet. My dad hasn't watched it yet, and that's kind of why I got the service for him, because I know you're like Star Trek, and so I'm excited to see his thoughts on it. But the impression I get from it's just one day, but from the internet, and once again, you can't really trust anything on this internet. But the impression that I'm getting is that it's very true to Picard, and it seems like it's a great Star Trek, classic Star Trek. And I'm happy for Star Trek fans too. And just seeing, Sir Patrick Stewart back at the helm, I think it's great. But I'm going to go check this out because it does look interesting. So if you want like real time, like in this moment, what is new, what has been released, Star Trek Picard is out on CBS All Access. That is the new thing.
All right. And with that being said, that is going to wrap up this episode of the Streaming Wars. I want to encourage everybody to follow us on Twitter and join our Discord to check out all the articles that we talk about here on the podcast and some that we don't get around to talking about on the podcast. Also, be sure to follow us on Instagram. That's where you can find out all the latest announcements related to the new episodes releasing for the podcast. You can leave us reviews wherever you listen to this podcast, because this episode, as well as our entire library, is available on multiple different platforms, as well as YouTube and Pandora. So you can check us out at any of those services. And then if you are so inclined, you can send us an email at thestreamingwars@gmail.com. Your emails are greatly appreciated to give us some feedback about the show or topics you'd like us to discuss on a future episode. With all of that being said, for Tony and myself, this has been the Streaming Wars, and we'll see you guys next time.
Thanks for listening to the Streaming Wars. Check us out on Twitter and Instagram. Also consider supporting us on Patreon. Links can be found at thestreamingwars.io.